Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Lora Cecere.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Lora Cecere, and today I'm interviewing Annette Clayton. Annette is one of my very favorite supply chain leaders, and I'm in my car, but it's the only time Annette could squeeze me into her busy schedule, even though she's retired. So Annette, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Laura. I'm really happy to do this with you.
Awesome. Well, Annette, this is a podcast to help people to think about their careers and to think back to when they were 25 and what they would have told their 25-year-old self. So let's start. Tell the audience a little bit about you.
Well, thanks again, Laura, and it really is my honor to do this with you. You've been such an influence on my career for, the last probably 25 years at least that I've known you, and thanks for doing this for really our network and people of supply chain. A little bit about me. I'm an engineer by education, so I'm a systems engineer, so a little electrical, a little mechanical, but mostly not the most excellent engineer, just an engineer. I was a co-op student for General Motors while I was in college, and then ended up working for General Motors for 20 plus years. So I have that automotive background. I did a number of very interesting roles for automotive. At one point, I was the president of Saturn, which launched the first electric vehicle, the EV1. So that was in my history. So no one's been more skeptical about, are we ready for electric vehicles than maybe I've been. I left GM after 20 years, and, we always leave usually because of leadership. And I had lost confidence in the path of the company and went to Dell, went to work for Michael Dell. In technology. And it turned out there were all these, intersections between technology and automotive as things were becoming more and more electric, more and more autonomous. I worked for Dell running their operations, running their supply chain, one of the better supply chain companies in the world. I learned a lot, especially about planning and tools. And I think that's probably where I first met you, Laura. Yes. And then I left Dell after about 7 years and went to Schneider Electric and worked in the energy sector. And it's interesting because these sectors have really intersected in such an interesting way: automotive, technology, and energy. And so I've felt somewhat lucky that I have not only a network of people, but really some background in all three of these categories that are converging as we speak today. And then I retired from Schneider about a year and a few months ago, and I've been doing board leadership. So I'm doing 4 public boards, 2 privates, but Nordson, NXP Semiconductors, Duke Energy, and Oshkosh that make vehicles, Oshkosh vehicles. So it's been a really fun career, and it's not really quite over. So I'm still working pretty hard for a retired person.
Well, Annette, let's take you back to young Annette, 25. Where were you? What were you doing?
Yeah, that seems like forever ago. I was working in General Motors. I was on second shift. So I was working second shift at a stand-up desk, I think. I was negotiating with my boss at the time to let me attend night school. I was on second shift, so I was trying to get him to let me go get my master's in engineering. And I was supervising skilled trades, mostly men, all skilled trades men that were 20 years my senior. So I was learning how to influence, learning a lot about leadership, and learning how you show up every day, really matters. And so it was a formative time in my career at 25 years old.
So what would you tell the young 25-year-old Annette if you had to go back in time?
Yeah, it's a really great question, because I don't think I knew it at the time, but it's one of the ways I mentor people today is, you grow the most individually, professionally, I think even personally, in the most difficult of times. So when it's really hard, when it's really tough, when there's more priorities and more problems than you can solve, that's when you grow the most. And I can remember a few jobs, like my first supervisory role was kind of like that. Frankly, my first role as Saturn president, that was a very, very tough job. The company was losing $1 billion a year. There were more problems than I could solve. I went home at the end of every day with a lot of unsolved problems. Every rock you pick up, there's something ugly under it, and you have to really prioritize. And I think when you're really kind of suffering, it's when you're growing the most. And I think I would tell my 25-year-old self to really reflect on those moments. What am I learning? How am I growing? It's not that bad. Trust my instincts. I think the other thing I might tell my 25-year-old self is to make sure you surround yourself with people who are different than you are, who think different, who solve problems differently, that diversity of thought and approach is really powerful. And I learned that over time, but I don't think I knew it at 25, and I think it could have been really helpful. I tended to, I think, surround myself with people who were more like me, more like my thinking, and I probably should have done just the opposite. And
How
then
would you
maybe
have done?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. How would you have done that, Annette? I mean, because there weren't a lot of Annettes back then, right? I mean, how many women were in the workforce with you?
Well, there weren't very many women. There were a few. And of course, we all knew each other very well. As a matter of fact, one of them for me was Mary Barra, who's now leading General Motors. But we were colleagues and grew up in the company together. But I would say surround yourself with people who think differently than you do as well. It's not just diversity of race or gender. It's approach. Because
Yes.
I tended to have my way of problem solving, but others' ways of problem solving often got me to a better place than my own. And I grew to realize that, but I don't think I knew it at 25. And having people around me that approach things differently, instead of kind of shutting that down, really embracing that.
Mhm.
And then maybe the last thing is, it was really around leadership. And one of the things is, I always felt that I could get the very best out of everyone, by being a good leader. And I start to realize that you spend 70% of the time on the worst performers in your team, when you should spend 70% of the time on the best performers in your team. And I started to realize that, in many cases, you just need to make those decisions faster. And, I would suffer through that and get the very best out of people, but maybe not enough, right, to really drive success. And so I think that was a learning. Those decisions don't get better with time. And if you typically know, trust your instincts and go ahead and make them. So that's probably some advice I would have given my 25-year-old self that I learned, over time, obviously.
Well, Annette, you've spent, what, 40, 45 years in management positions?
Yes, yes,
Uh,
yes.
what would you tell people about managing themselves, to be better leaders? What advice would you have for people in their careers?
I had a coach that told me one time that as you know, everybody thinks about being a lifelong learner. And I think, Laura, you're such a great example of that, right? Here you are in the next chapter of your career, and you're still learning. And I aspire to be, just like you, continue to learn and continue to grow, just keep learning. But I think one of the things we think less about is what you need to unlearn. And, sometimes you know what you need to unlearn because you've made a mistake. So you have to unlearn the concept that got you there. But I think we do learn more from our mistakes sometimes than our successes. And you just need to make sure you've unlearned that piece. And I think that's really important. When I'm mentoring people today, I talk to them about learning and learning agility and this concept of the things you need to unlearn. And a coach told me when I left Dell, she gave me 4 or 5 things that I needed to unlearn as I joined a new company. These things work at Dell, Annette, but they don't work at your next company. You need to unlearn those things. And I thought that was a really important moment for me. I think the other thing is having a good managerial process. And I know this is not as sexy as maybe some of the other things, but having an approach of how you manage your team, how you coalesce them is very, very important. And then I was able to repeat over and over again building high performing teams. And I think it's a repeatable formula. You know, some of it's very obvious, common goals and objectives, spending time together, high levels of trust and psychological safety, you know, collective accountability. We're all running together and we feel accountable to each other. But the one that people don't do that's really important is to debrief about what's going right and what's not going right. And when I started doing that with my teams and they felt like we could really talk about it, the team performance would go way up. And I was able then to reproduce this concept of high performing teams. And I think that's really important for leaders today to think about, you know, how to build these teams. And again, I think it's a repeatable formula that's definitely worked for me, but debriefing about, you know, what's going right and what's not going right.
And providing them the safe space to talk about what isn't going right, right?
That's right. That's right. Trust, high levels of trust.
You know, people talk about high performance teams, and I've been in several models. I've been in the Clorox model and the Procter & Gamble model and the General Foods model and the Dreyer's Grand Ice Cream model, and they were all very, very different. And I often say one of the first steps is let's define what a team is, right? So, there's a big difference between a football team and a swimming team and a soccer team, right? The rules are different, how you play is different. How did you define high performance teams, Annette?
Yeah, I probably defined it more as people playing their position, to the A level, really around, being able to articulate what their position contributed to the larger goals and objectives, and really getting people to play their position. And I think, we hear about that. We hear a lot of sports analogies about playing your position, but I think it correlates to the business world as well. And I think that people that play their position well, also look at how their position affects other positions. And when I talked about collective accountability, I think that's a really important point because, Laura, if you're struggling, I want to step in and kind of help you, or at least help you where our organizational boxes, kind of overlap. And sometimes that's not staying, play your position, but you may not stay completely in your lane. You may reach to the left and the right of your organizational, box and help the other guy. And so it's probably the nuance of not being completely siloed, right?
Well, one of the things I love about watching you as a leader was the fact that you embrace new technology and new ways of working and process innovation. Anything you would share with others about leadership? I mean, we're surrounded by tech, right? AI is everywhere, machine learning, hyperscale computing. Our ability to get to data today is so much different than the 25-year-old Annette. And I've watched you really work with teams to embrace process innovation. Anything you'd share there in insights?
I think you said the key word, you said process innovation. And I think there's lots of digital tools that we can overlay, but I think we need to understand the process first. And actually, one of the companies that I'm working with now, they were, like so many companies, failed kind of ERP approaches. And the challenge there is you have to really think about process innovation. And if you think about process innovation, you can overlay tools, you can take that data and apply, as you talked about AI, but the process innovation is the most important part. What are we going to do to our process that's innovative? And, maybe that comes through value stream mapping, maybe it comes through, actually working with experts like yourself, Laura, but I think the process innovation is like the first principle. The digital tool is kind of the second principle, right?
So Annette, anything I didn't ask you want to tell the group as they think about their careers and they think about managing themselves through the life cycle of their career?
There's one thing that was always in the back of my mind. Early in my career, I had a mentor. She was a high level female at General Motors, and she was Black, and she said to me, Annette, that feedback is a gift. And I said to her, I said, well, sometimes don't you get feedback that you feel is unfair, inappropriate? Or she says, it may be, based in, something that's completely wrong, but it's still feedback and it's still a gift. And I never miss the opportunity of onboarding it, even if in the end I decide not to change or not to believe it. I always onboard it first. And I kind of have gone through my career that way. Like when somebody gives me feedback, I take it. I take it first and then I analyze it, but I never miss the opportunity to onboard it somehow. And I think that's really important, especially in today where, I think a lot of people feel they might be getting feedback because they're young, or they might be getting feedback because they're female, or they might be getting feedback for all the other reasons. You just need to make sure you don't miss a piece of really important feedback. And so onboarding it, I think, is really important. The other thing for me, yeah, sorry, Laura, go ahead.
I was going to say, and how about asking for it? I mean, how do you get feedback that is relevant? I mean, because if you wait for like that annual performance cycle, right, it's, often not meaningful.
Right. I often asked, I think in my young self, often asked, people that I respected, would you have approached it differently? Would you have done it differently? Is there something I could have done to make it better? I asked that question a lot. And I learned things along the way because of that. And when people believe you're open to feedback, they're more likely to give it to you and give you in a productive way. But if they feel you're not open to feedback, chances are you've missed the opportunity. So I do think it's really, really important that that's your persona, right? I'm open to feedback. And it does take a lot of trust, and it means developing mentors that you trust, right? That you trust will give you the right kinds of feedback in the right ways.
Well, and I like how you framed that, Annette, because if you say, do you have any feedback for me? That kind of sounds cold, but if you say, how would you have approached this? Or, how do you feel about that? I like the framing that you've given it there. Yeah.
Would you have done it different? Because it doesn't give like a carte blanche, kind of open-ended, give me feedback
exactly.
about how my shoes look today. It's feedback about, would you have done this different? Would you have approached it differently? Would you have done it differently? Would your way have maybe sped it up? Or,
right.
Those things were helpful. And so I asked for the ways I thought could be helpful. Yeah.
And I interrupted you. Did you have something else you wanted to say?
One more thing that was on my mind about, coaching advice is really, there were two things that I think helped accelerate my career. And those were kind of this walking through the doors of opportunity. And a lot of times that sounded like a special assignment. And, special assignments, many times people, I think, avoid them or run from them. And when somebody asked me for a special assignment, I was usually one of the first to raise my hand. I'll try it. I'll do it. Not knowing at all how I might do it. But I think, I began to learn to trust my instincts, to trust myself. I learned how to do things I had no idea how to do. I learned how to reach out to other people, create networks to help me do those things. So I think this concept of, if there's a special assignment, don't be afraid. Raise your hand, go try, go do. And a lot of times those were big accelerants in my career. One of my special assignments was reporting its results directly to the board of directors. So I got a lot of attention, early on about being able to, drive through, some of these special assignments in a productive way. So I think special assignments should, your spidey sense should go way up. Oh yeah, that could be for me, and go for it.
Well, Annette, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time, and I wish you all the best. And I'm sure all the boards are benefiting from your great leadership. Thank you. All the best.